At dawn, Lytudiep's farm always woke up quietly. Mist lingered on the pomelo trees, and the earth still carried the cool breath of night. Lytudiep moved gently among the workers, greeting them with a soft smile, asking if they were tired, reminding them to drink water and rest. Her voice was calm, warm, and steady, the voice of a woman who had learned to stand on her own, who carried responsibility without complaint. She didn't just grow fruit. She cared for people. She arranged the harvest, sorted the pomelos into grades, organized transportation, and made sure every worker was paid fairly. Every detail mattered to her, because this land was not just her livelihood, it was her shield. The place where she protected the fragile peace she had built with her own hands. Behind that calm, however, lived a heart that had weathered many storms. James returned to Vietnam carrying more than luggage. He carried promises, guilt, and a truth he could no longer run from. Once, he had everything: status, a powerful family, a future others dreamed of. But he had also lost himself. Now, he was quietly gathering evidence against his own father, determined to correct wrongs that had haunted him for years. During a hushed conversation, James learned that a friend's mother was gravely ill. The surgery would cost 600 million VND. The man tried to appear strong, but James could see the fear trembling beneath his composure. Without hesitation, James placed 500 million on the table. "Take it," he said calmly. "Think of it as a loan. Right now, your mother's life matters more than pride." It wasn't just money. It was repentance. It was James choosing to be a better man than he once was. When James returned to the farm, he stood quietly, taking in the changes. Stones neatly lined the path. The gate was sturdier. The land looked cared for, alive. Lytudiep had done all of this without him. She was strong, independent, capable. And that truth both humbled and comforted him. They talked about fences, electricity, a simple bathroom still unfinished. Lytudiep spoke bluntly, sometimes sharply. That was who she was. James only smiled. "When you get angry with me," he said softly, "it means you still care." For a moment, Lytudiep said nothing. Her eyes softened. Then there was NHI. The little girl ran toward James the moment she saw him, her laughter cutting through the quiet evening. He brought roasted duck from the market, teasing her with guessing games, asking about school, about good behavior stickers with Doraemon and Pikachu. Small moments, ordinary moments. But to James, they felt like home. "You promised you'd come back," NHI said, looking up at him. "I always keep my promises," James replied. That night, their voices grew a little loud. NHI overheard and grew worried. Thinking they were fighting, James knelt beside her, smiling gently. "We're not arguing," he said. "Sometimes adults just speak loudly when they care too much." He pulled Lytudiep closer and laughed, and the child's fear melted away. James knew the road ahead would not be easy. By choosing Lytudiep, he was choosing to walk away from his family's expectations, from power, from the career he had once believed was his destiny. He would lose comfort, he would lose approval, he might even lose his name as he once knew it. But in return, he gained something far more real. He gained Lytudiep, a woman who loved honestly, lived truthfully, and never abandoned him even at his lowest. He gained NHI, a child whose trust was pure and unguarded. And he gained a life that was simple, imperfect, but free from lies. Standing on the quiet farm, surrounded by wind and earth and the smell of soil, James finally understood. Some people are not born to stand at the top of the world. They are born to step down, to choose love, to protect what truly matters. And this time, James chose to stay.